Alright, so this is going to be a basic intro to using Photoshop. We're going to start out with opening it up. You're going to find it down here in your doc, your bar there at the bottom. So we're going to make a new document. And we're going to start out, you can use whatever units you want. I'm going to use inches. And I'm going to make this 8.5 by 11 because it's the size of a regular piece of paper. If you want to print it out or something, that works nicely. You can make it 8 by 10 if you think you're going to make something on a frame, maybe. I'm going to make this 100, which is a little low. You can see the size here, 2.68 megapixels. If you wanted to make something like print quality, you would do it at 300. You can see this is significantly larger. Definitely not necessary for what I'm doing. I'm going to make it 100. Usually you want to be working in RGB color. And this could be whatever you want. I'm going to start it with transparent background. I could make it white later. If I made it white now, I could make it transparent later. It's not a big deal. And we want to make sure this is pixels per inch and not pixels per centimeter. Okay, because 100 pixels per centimeter, you can see the file size is going to be significantly larger, has more pixels in it than 100 pixels in every inch. All right, so let's do this. And we're going to start off, make sure we're in expert mode and not in one of these other ones. Okay, click into expert. And then here's my layers here. If they were not here for some reason, you could find them in the window up here. Layers, the window menu. Also, sometimes our menus disappear. Go reset panels. Okay, it's going to put everything back the way it's supposed to be. I've got my brush here. Let's make this smaller so I can see this bar down here. Here's the size. Okay, so we're going to start out using this brush. And there's lots of different brushes. These are the default brushes. You can see I can switch into different brush sets. Okay, and every time I click on one of these, I can make something on here. My opacity is set down here at 12%. Opacity means transparent, basically, right? If something is completely opaque, 100% opacity, you will not be able to see through it. In this case, we can see through it because the actual brush is kind of like a circular pattern here. You can see when I get closer to it what's making the brush up. If you just click it once, it sort of works like a stamp, right? I'm painting with it. And to zoom in, I've got it set up to use my mouse wheel as the zoom. You can also use the zoom tool here. Okay. Also, you can use the Navigator, which can be convenient. You can move this little guy around. You can see exactly where you are on your screen. Okay. I prefer usually just use my mouse wheel, and then the space bar will give me a keyboard shortcut to the hand here, so I can drag this around. Okay. All right, what are we doing? Let's try a couple other colors here. Let's try a different color. And here's our layers. This is important in Photoshop. We want to, generally speaking, we want to put everything on its own layer. It makes editing that option or that thing later much easier. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my default brushes, and you can see, let's look at this idea, this basic brush information here. This is a hard brush. You can see it says there, and you can tell by looking at the profile of it, the edge is very hard. I'm going to make it larger so we can see the edge is a little bit better. And let's make a new layer. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to find a soft brush. Okay, it doesn't really matter which one we click. These are just different sizes, right? I can click on this and change the size here too. Or using the square bracket key is another way that I usually prefer to do that. And this is, you can see, a soft brush here. All right, so I'm going to undo that. Edit, undo, Command Z. And I'm just going to make that a different color, so we can see the difference a little bit better. And let's move it around. I'm going to click on my move tool, And I can take this, because it's on its own layer, I can move this thing around wherever I want. And in Photoshop, whatever layer you have selected, that is what's going to be affected. You can see both of these blue brush strokes are on the same layer. So when I move one, they both move, which is why we generally want to put things on their own layers. You can also change the order of them just by clicking and dragging this up here. I'm going to let it go right when you can see it highlights that middle line right in between layer 3 and layer 2. I'll let go, and then it'll move it on top. Okay, from this, I can also change the size of this after I've done something with it. Okay, we can make it really tiny if we want. We can also, maybe we really like this thing, we want to make more of them. You can right click on it and duplicate this layer. It's going to ask what you want to call it. I usually just keep it like this. For this, it's going to be a relatively simple project here. I can also, a little shortcut, hold on the Option button. You can see when I have the Move tool selected, and I hold down the Option button, the little cursor changes to that double thing. It's copying it and creating a new layer. And you can see, here it is. I'll do it one more time. If you look over, so Option, click, and as I drag it, if you look at the layer menu right now, you'll see a new one just pop up all by itself here. There you go. Okay. And I can also, let's zoom in on this. If I move my mouse to one of these edges here, right in the center, I can squash it. This is a pet peeve of mine, so I'll put this out there. It's not so noticeable on this, but people do this all the time to like a picture of a person, right? If they want to resize it to make it fit somewhere, and they'll just go, oh, I want it a little narrower, and they'll do that. And another person's face looks like they've been squashed, and it just is a kind of a pet peeve. So when you're resizing, I'm going to cancel this first of all, because once I've started messing around, there's no way I'm going to be able to get it back to exactly the right spot. Okay, so I'm going to cancel this. That's the original proportion, right, of this thing. Okay, if I'm going to resize it by the corner. Okay, so that I know maybe it's not going to fit in the same space you want it to, but especially if it's a picture of something, you want it to look the way it's supposed to look, right? Okay, enough about that. Let's make another layer. Apart from the different brushes, sorry, one more thing with the brushes. Let's look at the brush settings here. If you're lucky enough to have a tablet, you can check out those. That goes beyond the scope of this video. We can change the color. Let's change our background color here to something different. Got our brush, go back in our brush settings, and let's see what this one does. Okay, you can see it's changing colors, or jittering between the two colors that I've selected, my foreground color and my background color. You can switch them with this little arrow if we want to do that. And look at scatter here, make another new layer. Okay, you can see how it's creating these little dots. Here's a little preview of the brush when it's being scattered. Okay, and let's unscatter it, and we'll do the spacing. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, and I'm going to turn these ones off so we can see a little bit better. Okay, and you can see if I make it smaller, or if I make the spacing a little closer together, bigger again. Okay, so kind of cool. You can check out the rest of those if you want. I'm not going to go through them in this video. Let's look at creating a gradient. So we want to fill in this space here. We've got a couple options. First, our opacity. Again, this is a slider that's very common in image editing programs and used in Photoshop for lots of different tools. All right, so I'm going to use our foreground and background colors here. Okay, you can see they're shown there as well. And this is a linear gradient, which is this option right here. Okay, and you can see it's creating a line, basically, transitioning from my foreground to my background color over whatever distance I've drawn with this line and in the direction of this line, right? Or maybe perpendicular to it if you're thinking about it that way. So we can drag it across this whole thing. We can also create a linear or radial gradient. And again, this is going to be, I'm starting at the center of my circle, and this is going to be the radius of the circle, the line that I'm dragging out here. Okay, and make this bigger. All right, and now if I put this, let's turn these back on. And you may think, oh, I've erased all my stuff. What happened? How come I can't see this? This is on top of it. Okay, if we want to make it transparent so we can see through it, you'll see that's not working because this is actually kind of a good thing that happened here. All right, so this is setting the opacity of our gradient when we draw it. Okay, I'll show you the difference. Let's turn that off, make another new layer. Okay, so let's say I set my opacity down, and I'll do basically the same thing, right? I'm going to draw this out to look like that. And I'll make it a little higher just because it's a little hard to see still. There we go. And you can see we can see through this thing. The problem, maybe not a problem, but why I sort of don't like that idea is because we can never get this to 100 now. This is the highest it can go is wherever we drew it at, 66 or whatever it was, right? And here's the opacity. I'm going to turn this layer back on that we drew at 100% opacity. I can still change the opacity of this after the fact using this slider over here. And you can do this for any layer. I can change the opacity of this line here if I want. Okay. And so I think drawing it at less than 100% opacity kind of limits what you can do with it later. Of course, there's certain circumstances where you'll want to do that, but generally I don't know that it's the best practice because you can't get back up to 100, right? So we're going to drag this down underneath these things. Let's put this one underneath there, underneath there, underneath. We don't need to do it one at a time, just kind of showing you. Okay, put it down the very bottom. And again, here's our opacity, right? And we can change the opacity of some of these objects. And I can move this around. And I can duplicate this. I can rotate it around. If I move it right outside the edge here, you can see it turns to these curved handles. Sometimes a little tricky to get it right in the right spot. And I can rotate this thing around. Zoom in a little more. Put this down here. And we have to check whether we want to commit this operation or cancel it. Okay? And this could be problematic. Here's a common issue. So you've done something and it's waiting for that. And usually it's pretty good about keeping it on the screen. You can see as I move around. But sometimes you may not notice it. And you want to go try to do something else and you can't. Everything is grayed out here, right? So it won't let you do anything else until you say yes or no to this thing that we've done. Okay, I'm going to look at a couple other basic ideas here, and that is using our selection tool. We've got 3 different ways to create a selection. I guess it's using this move tool here as a select tool as well, right? It's in the select section here. However, I think of these 3 as these are a different kind of selection than this. This is kind of choosing that object on that layer, and you can move it and do things with it. Let's look at the difference here. This selection tool is going to select an area on your screen here. Okay? And there's lots of stuff we can talk about with this. I'm not going to go into all the details, but we'll do some basic stuff here. I'm going to make a new layer because I want everything on a new layer. And I'm just going to fill this in with a color. Let's pick a different color here. Something a little lighter, maybe that'll show up better. Okay. And this is my paint bucket tool. I'm just going to click in this space. And when I've got this selected, if you look at this, it's like these little moving lines or marching ants. Sometimes I've heard people call them. And whatever I do, try to do to my document will only happen inside this area that I have selected now. All right, so I click in here, it's going to fill this in. And again, right, I can move this up or down in my layer stack. Now, once this is selected, Sometimes people have a hard time getting rid of this thing, right? But we're just going to deselect it. Command D. Okay. I'm going to draw another one up here. In this case, we're going to look down here. New selection, add to selection, and subtract to selection. These are really important. All these options, you notice whenever I click on a tool, there's this context-based menu here, right? That is options for that particular tool that you've selected. So this is constantly changing based on what tool you've selected. And they're really important. Could drastically change how the tool works, and they're not, you can't just kind of pretend like, those can't be that important. I just want to use the basic tool, okay? This is going to change how they all work. So I'm going to add to my selection. In this case, I can do something like this, okay? When it's on new selection, which is usually where it defaults, people are going, this isn't the right size. Oh, I want it a little bigger, and they're going to think they got to like try to draw the whole thing over again. Or something, right? Or draw a box and then draw another box. Okay? We can just do this. We can do this. Let's do this. Let's create this kind of sort of interesting thing. And let's drop one more in here just because I kind of want to. All right, this looks a little empty. Okay, a little more interesting. Sorry. All right, it's bugging me. It looks a little funky here. Okay, kind of think that's all right. One more box. Okay, and on a new layer, we're gonna drag a gradient through this thing, which is kind of cool. Color maybe more like a purpley with this yellow here. And we're going to drag this. Well, this is a radial gradient. Okay, so it's going to start with the center of the circle here, which isn't really what I wanted, but it'll still look cool. And because the rest of the circle, basically, the center is here, right? The rest of the circle is kind of out here, so it really is having the same effect as if I just had a linear gradient going through here, at least almost the same. But I could do here and start in the center, and then we'll see more of the circle idea, right? Okay. Or we could do this kind of reflected gradient here. This is kind of neat where it starts yellow in the center and then purple on the edges. I think I like doing it the other way though. We're going to hit this little reverse button. It's going to start with purple in the center and get yellow on the edges instead of the other way around. Right? Actually, it's harder to see those yellow ones. Okay. Anyways, you get the idea. So I'm going to deselect it, Command D, or select deselect, right? All right, we can also use the eraser tool. Whatever layer we have selected, we can erase. We can also use, let's look at this real quick. We can draw shapes like this. Okay, I could also fill those in with a gradient or with a color. I could also use this to delete whatever's on a layer. Click on this layer, backspace to delete. It's going to delete that shape. Deselect. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. Except for one thing, we're going to save it. You're going to save, right? We don't want to lose all our information. File, save, and make sure you look where you're going to save it, the location, so you know where it's going to be after, and make sure you name it something that makes sense and not some crazy name that you won't remember later. The end here.